Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my own grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Welcome to the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris Lecture Series. Since 2011, we've been presenting leaders of the civil rights era and currently those who are in leadership and providing justice and equality in this country. The struggle for justice and equality is very long. As Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice lends towards justice, but it's very long, very slow, and very tedious. We are trying to prepare the next generation of leadership, as well as those who are currently involved in making sure that we stay connected, we stay attached, and we stay committed to that struggle. Since 2011, the Martin Luther King Freedom Center has presented this lecture series in an effort to make sure that we all are aware of not only the history, but the current struggle. We've had incredible speakers who have come through many years of struggle and sacrifice to make our country a better place, and certainly to keep the dream of Martin Luther King alive. Today, we'll talk about voter suppression. The voter suppression in this country is almost as long as the history of the Republic. Certainly, it began with our Constitution, which separated those who could vote from those who couldn't. Property was the criteria. Gender was the criteria. Race was the criteria. All those things are equal to an effort to try to keep power in the hands of the powerful, keep those who are not empowered away from any voice in decision-making. We are very concerned that this effort has found a new voice, certainly in the Republican Party, but more importantly, in certain areas of the country, where efforts to confuse people, to discourage people from voting has become predominant. We want to make sure that people understand that the struggle for justice and equality and the right to vote is far from over. If you look at the history of this country and you saw what happened in the American Revolution, when they talked about the idea of justice and freedom and equality, but never gave voice to it in reality, that's something I think we have to always understand and appreciate, that there's never been a real distinction between the American dream of justice and equality and the reality of racism and economic oppression. So when the American Constitution was formed, and it said that you had to have property to vote, that slaves were property, that women couldn't vote, that was something I think that we did not see as a full signal of the hypocrisy in this country and the realities of this country. So today, as we see what's going on in the country, we have found that in particularly southern states, and particularly red states, there's been an increased effort to make voting more difficult. Historically, we saw things like poll taxes. We saw efforts to try to create literacy taxes and other efforts to try to discourage people from exercising their right to vote, particularly those who were not part of that power structure that was being made the rule rather than the exception in our country. The Koch brothers with dark money, probably one of the most recent examples of voter suppression effort. Probably in 2010, we began to see in earnest a real focused effort to try to discourage those from voting who disagreed with that right-wing philosophy that somehow or other moneyed interest in the powerful would control the government rather than the people. Stacey Abrams, who is our featured speaker today, has certainly been one of the leaders and at the forefront of this effort. She is the former member of the Georgia State Assembly, a former minority leader in Georgia, and a candidate for governor. Since her unfortunate but very close loss in that governor's race, she has really made her life's work the effort to make sure that voting is not only a privilege and a right, but something that's fundamental in this country. We are very concerned that the elections are being controlled by a very few individuals who really don't want participation in mass. As that continues, and probably in this year, the most important election in recent history, we will see a continued effort to try to suppress the vote, to try to discourage people from voting with long lines, with voter registration, with ID requirements. So many different efforts have been made that we have almost become numb to the reality that voting is no longer as easy and simple as it should be. Particularly in California, where there's mail-in ballots, registration at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the like. So we're going to talk about that. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, the co-leader of this lecture series, and Stacey Abrams will talk about voter suppression and, more importantly, how we're going to overcome the challenges that have been put in our face relative to our right to vote. During this lecture, I hope all of you will listen and pay close attention to the issues as well as the solutions that will be put forth in terms of making sure that the right to vote is, again, guaranteed. Not the exception, but the rule, that anyone who wants to vote will have that opportunity. They will not be suppressed. They will not be discouraged. They will not be denied that right to vote. So I hope all of you will join in today and appreciate the struggle for justice is far from over, but we're going to continue that fight and continue that struggle to make sure that justice and equality is the rule in this country. So thank you very much. And I hope that you'll enjoy the lecture, and more importantly, that you will be encouraged to pick up the fight and continue the struggle. Thank you. For the past 30 years, Barbara Lee has provided elected leadership not only to the Bay Area and California, but to the entire nation. Barbara Lee is someone who has fought for justice and equality her entire life. From her childhood in Texas to her teenage years in California, Barbara Lee has been committed to the struggle for justice and equality. From the time she was elected to the California Assembly in 1990 to her election in Congress in 1998, Barbara Lee has been focused on justice and equality as highlights of her political career and commitment. Since 2011, when we founded the Barbara Lee and Elihu Harris Lecture Series, she has worked to bring speakers as well as demonstrative leadership to the effort to inform and rally our community to the issues of justice and equality. Barbara Lee was the one vote in 2001 against giving war powers to President Bush. She has fought for HIV relief and AIDS relief. She has fought, again, for women's rights. She's fought for the rights of minorities and workers. Her commitment to the environment, all of these things are just, I think, well known for all of you who will watch the lecture series. But I want to highlight again that Barbara Lee's struggle for justice and equality is lifelong. She has committed her life to making sure that we all understand not only the right to vote, but the demand that all of us are involved in the struggle for justice and equality. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable Barbara Lee from the 13th Congressional District of California.
Good evening. Let me just take a minute to thank all of you for being with us this evening. I'd also like to thank Elihu Harris. Of course, he's our partner, one of the co-founders of the Martin Luther King Freedom Center. We did this together in the mid-90s, and I just want to thank him for his leadership and for continuing to really help our young people not only succeed, but thrive. So thank you, Elihu. I also want to thank Karen and Roy and all of the staff and board members of the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center. And most especially, I just have to say thank you to our sponsors again and our students, because our students are really phenomenal young men and women. And I always say they are not our future leaders. They're our leaders right now. We see them doing so many civic and engagement projects, not only around my district, but throughout the country. They go with me every year to Alabama to our faith and politics, civil rights pilgrimage, led by our great warrior, John Lewis. And let me just give a shout out to Judge Kennedy and Peggy Wallace Kennedy in Alabama. And Peggy, of course, was one of our lecture series and a supporter of the Martin Luther King Freedom Center. So hello to Peggy and to Judge Kennedy. I also just want to say to all of you who are with us this evening, that we are so thankful that you decided to join with us, because these are some very difficult times. We have to do things differently. And this is our first actual virtual lecture series. And so hopefully you'll enjoy it, you'll learn something, and you'll be inspired, because the chaos and what's taking place now, this pandemic, the disproportionate deaths and transmission of virus in communities of color is overwhelming. And so just know that as you're a member of Congress, I'm working day and night to make sure that we pass legislation that is for the people, not for these corporations. And I have to just take a moment to give a shout out to all of our essential workers, our frontline workers, because they're doing a phenomenal job on our behalf. So thank you all. Just know that we're fighting for you to make sure you get all of the protective gear that you need, everything that you need in terms of your employment or unemployment benefits. We're doing everything we can to make sure that your jobs are secure, and that during this period, help this Republican Congress understand how essential and necessary you are, and how we really thank you for what you're doing during this moment of very dire circumstances. But we'll get out of it. We'll get out of this together. And so it's quite a moment in history to be with you tonight. But I just want to thank you all for using technology so that we can be together. Let me just say how honored I am to be able to introduce and have with us tonight our, and I say our governor of Georgia, because Stacey Abrams really is the governor of Georgia. And I say that because I was able to I had the privilege to visit with Stacey and campaign with her during the election. And I saw the lines and lines and lines of people voting and early voting. And I saw that people really were being challenged by the system, as the governor, this governor, unfortunately, had established as the Secretary of State. And so I just want you to know that Stacey Abrams, for me, is the governor of Georgia, and I think for many people, and she has dedicated her life to voting participation and to making sure that everyone participates in this democracy. A couple of things let me just mention about Stacey. First of all, she's a best-selling New York Times author. I don't know if you know that, but she has written over 8 novels, romantic novels, and her pen name is Selena Montgomery. So Stacey, I just had to give you a shout out for that, because you are a woman of all seasons. And it's just phenomenal that you have that artistic side, and you take the time to really explore the depths of your mind and your spirit. And so just you are truly a phenomenal woman. But also Stacey served 11 years in the Georgia House of Representatives, 7 of those years as the minority leader. She, again, received more votes than any Democrat has ever received in the state of Georgia in its history. So you know she knows what she's doing, and you know she knows how to bring coalitions together. And that is exactly what she did in Georgia, and that's what she's doing now. She really understands the nature of the importance of the census. She has established the 2019 fair count, which makes sure that we all are informed with regard to the importance of the 2020 census, because she wants to see greater participation in terms of our civic duties, in terms of our responsibilities in this democracy, but also to make sure that those resources are targeted to our communities where they deserve to go, for roads, for bridges, for schools, for healthcare clinics. We have to fill out this census. And so, Stacey, I want to thank you for using your time and your prestige and making so many sacrifices to make sure that we know the importance of the census and that everyone gets counted. Because if you're not counted in, you're counted out. Also, Stacey is heading up the Southern Economic Advancement Project, which is a public policy initiative to broaden economic power and to build equity in the South. Of course, we know economic power and political power go hand in hand. Also, let me just mention her academic credentials. She's a graduate of Spelman College and also the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and also Yale Law School. And she was raised in Georgia. However, she grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi. She also is a lifetime member of the Council of Foreign Relations. So I tell you, Stacey, we are really honored and privileged to have you with us this evening. And I want to just say thank you and turn it over to you. And thank you again, everyone, for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Congresswoman, so much for having me here. I'm excited to join you tonight from the ancestral home of Martin Luther King Jr. I'm in my home in Atlanta, and I am so honored to be a part of this conversation. The question, where do we go from here, gets asked sometimes rhetorically, but I think there's never been a moment in the 21st century where it was such a salient question. I grew up in Mississippi. I was born in Wisconsin, lived there for 3 years, moved to Mississippi where my parents are from, and at the age of 15 moved to Georgia. As the Congresswoman was kind enough to point out, I've lived in Texas, I've lived in Connecticut, but I always come back south. And part of what draws me home is the reality that the fights we need to fight begin here. But nothing that we're fighting for here can be won unless we work together nationwide. In 2018, I stood for governor of Georgia. I ran in that race because I had spent 20 years working to build the capacity to serve the people I love. I grew up in a home in Mississippi, the daughter of not one, but two civil rights activists. My parents were engaged in the civil rights movement as teenagers. My father, at the age of 14 or 15, we get that little fuzzy sometimes, was arrested. And that part is clear. He was arrested because he was helping to register voters in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, one of the hot spots for the civil rights movement. My father once had his foot nearly shot off by a cop who didn't think he was right to want to have the rights that other citizens took for granted. My mom did the same work. She was just good enough not to get caught. But what we say about both my parents is that they raised us to understand that it is not enough to see problems. Our responsibility is to fix those problems. They raised us with these pillars of faith, family, and service to guide how we lived our lives. And those are the pillars that I often think about when I think about how Martin Luther King Jr. and those lieutenants who worked so hard to sacrifice and to build a better America, how they confronted the challenges of the 1950s and 60s, and how we have to confront the challenges of the 21st century. When I stood for governor in 2018, I brought to bear my experience as an entrepreneur, as a writer, as a legislator, but also as a citizen who had watched moments after moment where people thought that they had the right to be heard, only to find those rights taken away. I studied to understand the infrastructure of government, but I also wanted to make certain I understood the private sector and the nonprofit sector. And I did my work to try to build the skills and capacity. And I talk about that because I know that there are young people watching this broadcast who need to see themselves in every moment. Not everyone is called to run for office. Not everyone is called to become a business person. Some folks want to do what they want to do, but we all have a place and a responsibility to stand in the moments where we are and to build towards a better future. When I stood for governor in 2018, I faced opposition from within my political party and from outside. But my responsibility was to, number one, not let anyone define who I was or what I was capable of. Part of what we have to understand is that we deserve the citizenship we hold. We deserve our claim to being from America. And that means that we can fight just as hard as anyone else to make certain that that American nature is lived through how we behave. In the wake of my election, I had to make decisions because I did not win. I ran against someone who, despite being the Secretary of State responsible for the election, was permitted by the laws of Georgia to also control the election. And there was a litany of challenges that we were able to identify before that election that not only blocked my access, but more importantly, blocked the access of Georgians to their right to vote. In the aftermath of that election, I took 10 days between election day and my decision to acknowledge the legal sufficiency of the election, but to not concede that the system was right, which I like to call my non-concession day. I took time to investigate how I could do the work And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. In 2018, in November, I had 10 days to grieve, 10 days to wonder, 10 days to be angry, to think about the thousands and thousands and thousands of Georgians who did not have their votes counted, who were not allowed to access the right to vote in the United States of America. And as angry as I was for what happened here in Georgia, I know that it happens across our country in every election. That the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the pinnacle of our commitment to democracy, has been undermined and eviscerated by leaders who do not deserve the title. Because anyone who would claim to believe in democracy but doesn't believe in the democratic values that let every eligible American be heard is not doing his or her job. And so instead of wallowing in self-pity, I decided to do what my parents raised me to do, and that is to fight. I created 3 organizations, as the Congresswoman was kind enough to point out. I had 10 long days, so I had some time to think. Number 1, the work I was called to do was not simply to run for office. Titles are great, and they are important. They signal what you're supposed to do. But we should never lose sight of the work that we should accomplish. The work that I saw before me was the responsibility to ensure that every eligible American would be able to cast a ballot and have that ballot counted. I created Fair Fight Action and Fair Fight 2020. These are 2 organizations that work to not only investigate how voter suppression happens, but to work to build infrastructure so that it does not work, to build infrastructure to ensure that those who would block access to the right to vote are stopped in their tracks. And because this is not just a Georgia problem, we now operate in 18 states. We've built an unprecedented network across 18 battleground states to ensure that the voices of Americans are heard in this election. But we know that that is not enough. We must have congressional actors who are willing to invest in our democracy. I'm so proud of the work done by Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Her commitment to justice is not simply something she says. It is something she lives every day. And her fight to ensure that resources are put into place so that every American has the ability to vote in November is something we should applaud. We know that if we invest in our elections in November, that means we expand access to vote by mail. The goal isn't to make sure everyone votes by mail, because that's not going to be realistic. But the goal is to minimize how many people have to be in line in November. We never want to see again what we saw in Wisconsin, as voters were forced to choose between their health and their safety and their participation in democracy. What we know is that if we increase access to vote by mail, if Congress invests in it, if the U.S. Senate decides to do its job and pass those funds along to our states, then we can ensure that people can vote by mail, they can vote in person early, and they can vote in person on election day. But we need to get as many people to vote from home as possible. And that means funding vote by mail, funding the postage, making sure that we have the laws to let those ballots be received on time, and making sure people can correct any mistakes they make. But second to that, we have to think about the infrastructure and the inputs. I started Fair Fight Action and Fair Fight 2020 to work on voter suppression. But I also understood that they've weaponized one more part of our democracy, and that's the U.S. Census. We often see the census as just a count of who's here. If you have a cell phone or a utility bill, they already know who you are. The issue is, what do you need? That's what the census is responsible for. It allocates $1.5 trillion. And we know that for people of color, if we are undercounted to the extent they expect, we would lose $8 billion every year from our communities. And in the moment of COVID-19, we understand how crucial that money is. Those are the dollars that will not be spent in our hospitals. Those are dollars that are not expended to make sure that our frontline workers have the protective gear they need. Those are dollars that don't ensure that our children have access to the school lunches that they still need despite being out of class. Those dollars set our future. And if we are not counted, we do not count. But the 2020 census not only allocates financial power, it allocates political power. That political power comes when we reapportion the 435 members of Congress. States that have grown larger get more people and more representation. States that have grown smaller actually lose representation. And so we need to get it right. But it also determines how we draw the political lines that determine everything we vote for, from school board all the way to Congress. And the reality is, if those lines are drawn wrong, then politicians get to pick their voters. The way America should work is that voters get to pick their leaders. And so I created Fair Count, which is working across the country to ensure that we have an accurate count of those who are the most often left out of the census: people of color, immigrants, rural communities, children under the age of 5, and renters. But if we can get those folks counted, then we all get the resources we need and the power we deserve. The third organization I created in the wake of 2018 is the Southern Economic Advancement Project. We're focused on the 12 states of the South, but our work is national because we know that what COVID-19 has laid bare is the systemic inequities that we find throughout our country, that those who are economically vulnerable are not resilient to things like a pandemic because they're the first to lose their jobs, the last to get their stimulus checks, and the last to get access to the resources they need to rebuild their lives. My passion is making certain that poverty does not cripple us. I grew up working poor. My family worked hard to make ends meet, and sometimes those ends couldn't touch. But my mom and dad worked as hard as they could, never giving up. But what they taught us is that we should never give in to the notion that poverty is permanent. I work hard to ensure that every day I live the credo that my parents raised me with and the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Because on the day he perished, he was working on the Poor People's Campaign because he understood that getting the right to vote, getting civil rights was the beginning of our dignity. It was the beginning of our citizenship being made real and whole. But until the poorest among us have the same capacity, the same access, then we are not truly who we claim to be. Where do we go from here? We go forward to fight. We fight for a democracy that represents all of us. We fight for leaders who believe in all of us. And we fight for a society that sees all of us. That's my commitment, a commitment drawn from understanding the history that brought me this far and the legacy that we have to leave for the next generation. And so I'm excited to be here today. I'm so thrilled to be included. And I want to say to Barbara Lee and to those of you who are listening, thank you for your commitment to justice for all.
Stacey, thank you so much. I know everyone is revved up and inspired just with your presentation and your presence. And a couple of things I want to say. One is in this COVID pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic, we know the challenges are even greater. We know that their efforts to suppress the vote even further. Now, just in Congress, what we're doing in terms of the legislation, we tried to put over $1 billion. I think it was 1.5 billion in one of the bills. Of course, we could only get 400 million. So we're still going to keep going and we never stop. So we're going to try in this next bill to put additional resources in. But how do you see now, assuming we had all of the money to do what we needed to do, vote by mail, absentee voting, voting at the polling place, all of the challenges around COVID-19 and voting, I know providing easier access will help, but the voter suppression efforts, given some that are using this moment to suppress the vote even further, what do you see any new tactics that they're using? What's going on that we should look out for?
Let's understand what voter suppression is in the 21st century. Everybody remembers the guns and the dogs and the hoses of the 1950s and 60s and 30s and 20s. But in the 21st century, voter suppression is, can you get on the rolls and stay on the rolls? Can you get access to a ballot? And can you get your ballot counted? What you all were willing to put into the legislation, what the Klobuchar-Wyden bill calls for, is congressional action that says, in this election, no matter where you live, you are an American. And for once, we're going to have a universal system of democracy. Every single state in America has access to vote by mail. But what happens is that some states make it harder to use it. What those bills will accomplish is saying that no matter where you live, everyone has equal access. And here's why this matters. If you think about Election Day, if all of the people that we have who are eligible to vote and are going to be eager to vote because of what we've seen happen in the midst of COVID-19 and for the past 4 years, if they all try to go into the polling place, it's going to be too crowded, it's going to make everyone sick, and it's going to inflame the worst of who we are. But if we can get the majority of those folks to get out of line and vote by home, you've now made it easier for those who have to go in to do so. And so vote by mail is the safest and most secure way to do it. And every single state already knows how to. We just have to give them the resources to scale it up and to make certain that everyone has the same access. So if you think about 100 people in line, if we can get 75 people out and put them voting from home, that's great. The second step is making sure that the next 10 people, so we got 25 left, we need 10 of those folks to vote early. And so we need early voting centers in every state. Most states have some version of in-person early voting. Not every state, but every state has the capacity, especially if we invest in it now, because they have time to plan for November. If we have at least 2 to 3 weeks of in-person early voting, those 10 folks can go and vote when they can. Maybe when they're getting off of their shift, working as a frontline worker, knowing that they're only going to have a few hours of sleep before they have to go back in. But we create opportunities for those folks to go and vote. And that leaves us on election day with only 15 people to worry about. Those 15 people don't have any other option. And that's one of the most insidious parts of the refusal to use vote by mail, because there are people who cannot vote any other way but in person. Folks who are disabled, people who speak English as a second language or have language barriers, the homeless who cannot vote by mail, those who've been displaced by COVID-19 by evictions or foreclosures, or those who tried to vote by mail but couldn't get their ballots and didn't get their ballots counted and who need to come in and make sure their votes are included. What Republicans are trying to do, and it's mostly Republicans, although there are good Republicans who are working to make this better, we have to understand that the responsibility is on the federal government to ensure that our elections work, because of the federal government, they have to happen in November. We don't get a do-over and we don't get a delay. But if we invest now, if we use the infrastructure we already have, the toolbox we already have, we can get it done. And at the same time, we know that there are folks on the other side of the conversation who are crying fraud. Voter fraud is nearly mythological. You are more likely to be struck by lightning than for there to be an incident of voter fraud. That's because most people aren't trying to vote twice or 3 times. They're trying to vote once. And if we clear the deck, use our tools, and let them get into line, let them get their ballots, then we will have full participation in our democracy. The last thing I'll say is this. The United States experienced its first known examples of COVID-19 around the same time as South Korea. South Korea just recently had national elections, and they were able to conduct those elections and have the single highest turnout they've had in their country since the 1990s. If South Korea can do it, America can. We have the technology, we have the capacity, but what we have to have is the heart to believe that citizenship should mean something and the right to vote is real.
Stacey, thank you for that. Let me just mention this. We've been trying, and this is my own perspective, okay? Coming from COINTELPRO and some of the movements, understanding how the government works and what the attitudes are. We've been trying to fund the Postal Service, our letter carriers, our mail carriers. My grandfather was a letter carrier. These are essential workers. They deserve all of the protective gear that they deserve because of their job. Many, primarily Black and brown letter carriers. The Postal Service was, when I was growing up, the primary means into the middle class in Texas. And so I have a real passion for the Postal Service and our postal workers. Well, let me tell you, we tried to get funds in for our letter carriers and postal workers, and the administration said, no, not one dime. Now, my own thinking is this. They don't want to fund the Postal Service because they know that mail-in ballots and the right is another way to be able to ensure that people of color and senior citizens and others, people in rural communities, are able to cast their votes. So I believe myself that one of the reasons that they're being very resistant to funding the Postal Service is because of the issue of November and people casting their votes by mail. And I think this is a voter suppression tactic that they're using.
I think that you're right in that Donald Trump voted by mail in 2020. He believes it's okay for him. He believes it was safe for him. He believes it was allowable. And yet he refuses to allow the same to others. In fact, he said that he believes that if vote by mail is permitted across the country, that Republicans can't win. But here's the thing I want people to remember. Democracy isn't partisan. We may pick people who represent our partisan interests, but the machinery of democracy is nonpartisan, just like the mail service. And the reality is, if we allow the post office to fail, it not only fails us on election day, it fails those rural families that rely on its carriers to get the meds that they can't get because they don't have access to Medicaid expansion and they don't have pharmacies in their neighborhoods. It helps the Native American communities that live too far away from polling places and are not permitted to vote in any way other than voting by mail. We know that when we see voter suppression, it doesn't look like it used to. It looks like administrative hurdles. It looks like administrative hurdles. It looks like bureaucratic snafus, and it looks like common sense arguments that fall apart the minute you investigate them. Breaking the Postal Service has long been an ambition of many who thinks it should be privatized. But the reality is we are too large a nation, and we understand because of what COVID-19 has laid bare, we do not have the infrastructure to eliminate the things that work. The Postal Service works. It connects us. It gets groceries to those who can't get to grocery stores. It gets services to those who were quarantined, and it ensures that we are connected for our election. So I share your deep, deep skepticism about why they wouldn't put those funds in, but I urge everyone listening to encourage every single leader that they elect to fight hard, because the next package that comes out needs to include not only safety and security for our elections, but defense of our Postal Service.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for that. And I know that my district and those who support the Martin Luther King Freedom Center really value and love the Postal Service, and will lead the effort to make sure that others advocate for inclusion of the Postal Service in the next bill. Stacey, let me ask you something. Now, we met during years ago during a voter registration drive. It wasn't yours. It was, I don't know, I campaigned in the South quite a bit because it's such a wonderful place to come as an African American, first of all, and as a woman to help with voter registration, get out to vote efforts. So I met you during one of these campaigns years ago. And what I noticed about you and the remarkable your presence, first of all, was so remarkable, but secondly, how you work in putting coalitions together in Georgia. I mean, your supporters and people you were registering were from the rural communities. They were white, they were people of color, they were low income, middle income, there were a few rich folks. I went to a couple of fundraisers. I mean, and so you were able then, I mean, this is way back when, understood why we had to unify if we were going to win. And so one of the issues that I've worked on forever is poverty. And I've always thought that, and now, unfortunately, we see more people fall into the ranks of the poor because of COVID-19. So we're fighting, like you would not believe, to get SNAP benefits and more
Absolutely.
food, more money for food in the next bill. But having said that, let me just say, I think poverty and lifting people out of poverty is an issue that everyone can relate to. Because, you know, this administration has a way of trying to divide and conquer people. But poverty and lifting people out of poverty is a value that so many people hold. And I know you have spoken to that in your organizing methods and speeches. And I went with you into some rural communities, and they were very low income communities. And they weren't all Black, they were white rural communities, and they understood what you were saying in terms of putting these coalitions together to lift everyone out of poverty. Can you speak to that value and because you've been probably more successful in organizing around those issues than most candidates I've ever seen, or most activists?
Thank you. I grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, which was not predominantly Black. I didn't have Black teachers until I moved to Atlanta, actually. And the communities I was a part of, my mom and dad were very intentional about making certain that we performed public service, which seemed crazy to us because we're like, you know, we're poor too. And what my parents would tell us is no matter how little we have, there's someone with less. Your job is to serve that person. And I believe that. And I believe no matter how wealthy you are, there is someone with less. But also no matter how poor you are, there's someone with less. Our responsibility is to create the space for people to know they can serve and they can serve in their way. I never exempt anyone from responsibility, but I also never hold anyone accountable for who they are or what they look like. I know what it means to be treated differently because I'm Black, because I'm a woman, because I have natural hair. And I'm always very intentional about seeing who people are, not what they look like. But don't get me wrong. There are those who would use what I just said to say, oh, we shouldn't believe in race or gender. Of course we should. These are immutable characteristics that we use to tell ourselves stories about who we are and who we see. But my point is that it should never be a barrier to who we can become. And that's what I try to work on. And so when you came down to work with us, we went everywhere. My campaign, we worked both in the campaign and in voter registration. We registered voters in all 159 counties in Georgia, including the counties where they filmed Deliverance. And when I campaigned, I went to those same counties, but I also went to the poorest Black counties, the middle-class Latino counties, the places where Asian Americans live, and the few communities where we have Native Americans in Georgia, because my responsibility was to go everywhere and talk to everyone. When it comes to poverty, what we have to understand is that poverty is immoral, but it's also fixable. And we've taken this scripture that says the poor will always be among us as an excuse not to act. I see it as a call to arms. That is our responsibility. But poverty is also economically inefficient. For people who don't care about the morality of the thing, you should care that we spend more money letting poverty exist than we would if we solved the issue of poverty and got to focus on how we grow opportunity. I want us to get to the opportunity conversation, and we cannot get there unless we organize our private sector, our public sector, and the nonprofit sector to respond to the reality of what poverty looks like, what it does, and how it robs us of the human capital that could make us stronger.
And Stacey, you know, it's so important that we recognize and understand that that everyone has every demographic have millions of people who live below the poverty line. It's just in the Black community, the percentage is much higher.
Absolutely.
Here in my district, in the Golden State of California, in a very innovative, technologically savvy, enlightened community, nearly 30% of Black and Latino kids in my district live below the poverty line. I think the average income of an African-American and Latino family probably is $40,000, $45,000, where the average income, the median income is probably about $150,000, $160,000. So even in California, and let me just mention the COVID deaths right now. Mm-hmm. We're 6% of the population here in California, 12% of the deaths. That's African Americans. Okay. So we have a large percentage who fall below the poverty line in the African American community, but we have so many other people, and the numbers are so great in every community across the board. And so I've always tried to convince my colleagues that if we talk about those issues that lift people out of poverty into opportunity, you can really unify people around what's common rather than what we have, what our differences are.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the work we're doing with SEEP, the Southern Economic Advancement Project, is looking at those systemic inequities that become so much more obvious in the midst of things like a pandemic. But we need to understand what this pandemic is revealing to us. We will see again and again as climate change takes hold, because climate inaction is going to hit the vulnerable, the hardest, and the fastest. And we know that this is the novel coronavirus of 2019. We don't know what's happening in 2021 or 2022. And so our responsibility as citizens is to hold ourselves accountable for more, but also to dream bigger. In the state of Georgia, African Americans comprise 32% of the population. We are 54% of the deaths. The city of Albany, tiny city of Albany. You actually came to visit there when we went from Fort Valley to Albany. You drove with us down there. Albany is it's a major center, but it's one of our smallest big cities. It was number 4 in March as it had the 4th highest coronavirus infection rate in the world. And this is a community that does not have access to healthcare because under current administration and previous administrations, they've allowed all of the rural healthcare centers to shut down. We have 9 counties in Georgia without a single doctor. But here's what that leads to. There is a cyclical effect to poverty that we seem to pretend doesn't exist. When we use property taxes to determine the investment in our schools, and when our communities are undercounted in the census, our school children never get access to the resources they need, and they never get the education they deserve. That means they grow up undereducated, without access to resources, and even if they manage to scrabble and do what so many young people of color do and get the education they need despite where they go to school, they then move into a system that underestimates them and over-incarcerates them. That over-incarceration and that underestimation means they never make as much money, they never get as many opportunities, and they come into being with less than anyone similarly situated. That cycle then continues because they never can move out of their community, they can never get access to more, and their children start the cycle again. But because it's a cycle, we know we can break it. We break cycles all the time when we want to. We're working hard to break the cycle of coronavirus infection because we're looking for a vaccine. We know that we need personal protective equipment, and we're doing everything we can through social distancing to break the cycle of disease. Poverty is a disease that we can break, but we have to have people committed to doing so, because to your point, when we are no longer investing in poverty mitigation and instead we're investing in opportunity expansion, then we all do better. When we have more people who are working hard and not working just to make ends meet, then we have people who are using their capital, their intellect, and their drive to improve their communities. I want to live where everyone is doing well. I want people to be able to dream big. And that's the America that I was raised to believe we should work for. And so I'm excited always to be with you because I know you understand where we begin, but you have the vision for where we can be.
Well, Stacey, thank you for that. And let me just say, we now are seeing the disparities in our education system and the gaps. So many of our young people don't have access to broadband. I know in Georgia, here in California, in my district. And so we've got to do the emergency measures now in terms of making sure our children have access to food, to broadband, to computers. But I think we also need to take this time to see how we restructure our educational system for kids who have been left out and marginalized, as you just laid out. And I think also we need to take this moment and yes, we've got to address the emergency, the underlying conditions of health disparities, for example, asthma, diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure. What we're seeing are underlying conditions in communities of color, especially in the African-American community, that didn't just start. These underlying conditions have been with us for generations, since the beginning of time, since the middle. I mean, this is what the civil rights movement has been all about. And so now, all of a sudden, others are beginning to see the disproportionate rates and the inequities in our healthcare system. But this is across the board. And so we have to really, I think, use this moment of emergency to stop the bleeding and the pandemic upon pandemic, but don't allow those to say that, African Americans are sicker and that's why they're dying more. We haven't had access, as you said, to healthcare. Yeah. In rural communities, very few doctors. We put in this last bill $600 million for community health centers, and we're trying to make more progress on rapid testing and all the health, issues, tracing, contact tracing, testing, rapid response testing, all of what we need in communities of color and in low-income communities. But beyond this, we have to have that vision, and we have to think during this period, what is it that we need to do later to address these inequities that now the rest of the world sees?
Well, and I think this is the perfect moment for our conversation, because the ranks of this is a perfect moment for our conversation because the ranks of the impoverished are growing by the day. We now have 26 million people who are collecting unemployment, a rate that rivals the Great Depression. And coming out of the Great Depression, it wasn't about using a crisis to game the system. It was about using a crisis to expose the brokenness of the system. I began my work in government actually as a teenager. I was one of the only kids at Spelman College who voluntarily went to city council meetings. I got into a fight with Maynard Jackson and ended up working for the city of Atlanta during my time in college. And I wasn't an intern. I worked as a research assistant. I got to work on issues of youth poverty and gang violence. I then moved from there and I interned with the EPA twice, looking at issues of how communities of color were disproportionately affected by environmental pollutants. I went to work for the Office of Management and Budget during one summer during grad school because I wanted to understand technology. And I worked on the Technology and Information Infrastructure Assistance Program and got to evaluate organizations that were starting to use technology back in the 2000s. I've used my time in government to understand that there are very critical differences between what a city and state can do and what a federal government can do. And recovery from this pandemic is going to require the understanding of the complexity of what government can and cannot do at every level. The closest to the people are our school boards and our city council and our county commissions, but they have the least amount of flexibility in their budgets and the greatest amount of responsibility for daily contact with those who are in need. Our state governments are intercessors. And if those states do not care about all of the people they serve, then we will see people not get the resources they deserve. And that's why the federal government is so critical. It's why it's so important that we have this election with full participation, because the investments that need to be made at the federal level shouldn't be trickling down to the city and county level. They should be flooding to the people who need them the most. Because while poverty has often gotten to people of color first, Black people fastest, we know that it affects every community, that the Navajo community that owned this land, that they are being decimated by COVID-19 because the Indian health bureaus have not been able to provide access and adequate testing. We know that for Latinos and for Asian Pacific American and Pacific Islanders, that there are communities that are not only isolated, but because we tend to have in all of these communities, Black, Latino, and AAPI, because we have mixed documentation families, there are folks who are hiding from help because they're afraid that they will lose access to their families and their communities. We should use this moment not to game the system, but to fix the system. We have the responsibility as leaders, whether we're elected or not, to imagine what America should be and work towards that end. And I think that's what you're calling for, and that's what we should absolutely deliver. Because when we lift up the poorest person in our society, we lift up our entire society, and that makes us stronger and more resilient for the next crisis.
That's right. And systemic change has got to happen. And now, while everyone is in this together, hopefully people will begin to see that the structural and systems of our government just aren't functioning for everyone. Stacey, I know it's getting late now. A couple of things. One is people ask me all the time, don't you get weary? Don't you get tired? How are you dealing with this 24/7? I mean, we're working, even though physical distancing, sheltering in place. I had to fly to DC and back, and it was quite a challenge on airplanes. But, and it's difficult. But as difficult as it is for me, our frontliners, essential workers, and those who are way out there helping out each and every day just to save lives, they're the ones who are really being challenged. And so we've got to help them and pray for them and work for them. And so people ask me how I'm handling all of this. And I have to stop and say, wait a minute now. I think about all those on the front lines and saying, I'm a Black woman in America, and still we rise, right? And so we've had so many challenges since our existence in this country 250 years ago. And so it's kind of like, we know what we have to do. We can't get weary. We have to, take care of ourselves, follow all of the health directives, and be sensible. But we also have to take this moment to help others and to fight like hell so that we don't ever get back in this situation again. And so I want to ask you how you're dealing with it, because for me, even though it's hard and challenging, I have to draw upon, my mother, Shirley Chisholm, all the Black women who said, you better not get tired when you're in the midst of a challenge and have awesome responsibilities. How do you deal with this?
I am blessed. I have an extraordinary family. My mom and dad are raising my 13-year-old niece. They are sheltered in place, but they're only 20 minutes away. I've got 5 brothers and sisters, most of whom are here. I've got one sister in Kentucky and a brother in California, but we connect with one another. We talk. We have a family book club amongst the siblings that's supposed to be meeting next week, so I got to finish reading a book. But more than that, I know that the work I do has to be done. And I think that's what you're speaking to. Mm-hmm. We're each called in different ways. For me, I grew up in a family where when my parents would take us out to volunteer, we would go to soup kitchens and homeless shelters. And they never called it volunteering. They just said, we're going to go. because they didn't want us to think we were doing something we shouldn't do, or that we were doing something with largesse. It wasn't that we were benefiting others. We were doing what we were supposed to do. When you see hurt, you fix it. When you see harm, you try to mitigate it. And I didn't know any better. I'm good at building infrastructure. I'm good at responding to challenges by trying to build something that can not only solve the immediate problem, but can work to solve the problem when I'm not there. And I've been privileged to be able to do that work with the support of folks like you, with a lot of people who've invested time and talent and treasure in helping build these organizations. But I wake up every morning knowing I'm going to think about, how do we protect our elections? How do we ensure that we have an accurate census? Because I want to flag for you what they're trying to do with delaying the census. It might make sense for the moment, but there's also quietly a movement to allow citizen age voting populations to be used to basically game the system when it comes to redistricting. And so we've got to focus on that and fight to make certain that whatever is done to protect the census in 2020 doesn't undermine people in 2021. And I wake up every morning thinking about, how can we work with those SNAP beneficiaries who, because of an antiquated federal system, still haven't gotten their stimulus checks, because they don't get banked, because they don't have to file their income tax. And so I'm working with Project 100, which is helping to move $1,000 to 100,000 people who receive SNAP benefits. While you work to get more money into the pot, I'm trying to figure out how we make sure the pot doesn't burn, because there's nothing in it for those who need it. My responsibility is to work. And that work doesn't stop because COVID-19 comes, because an election doesn't go the way I want it to, because people chastise me for who I am and what I say. The work goes on because that's the point. I grew up poor. I understand that the poverty I experienced is nothing like the poverty of others, but it's worse than a lot of people will ever know. And no one should ever have to think about it or grapple with who they are and what they're capable of because of what's in their wallets and what's in their refrigerator. My responsibility is to use my faith, my family, and my commitment to service to spend every day trying to live up to the legacy of those Black women and Black men, of those freedom riders and civil rights leaders. And it's not a conscious thought every day, but it is a common thought that lives in my heart, that if I can be a part of making us better and stronger, then I'm doing my work and I can go to sleep and I can sleep easy.
Stacey, I know you're a woman of great faith. And in the book of James, you're reminding me of faith without the scripture, faith without works is dead.
Yes, ma'am.
And so you're such a wonderful warrior, woman warrior, who really exemplifies that. And I want you to have the last word. But before you do, I just wanted to say again, thank everyone for tuning in and being with us this evening. But also, Stacey, I just want to say to you, I'm glad you took that 10 days after your election as governor, that they wouldn't allow you to be sworn in as. But during that time, I know, because we were part of that in Washington, everyone wanted you to run for the Senate, the United States Senate. I mean, it was like people were begging you to do that. And of course, members of the Black Caucus we all wanted you to do that. But you know what? I'm glad you listened to your voice and you did what you thought was the right thing to do. And I think what you have done and what you're doing, and by your deliberating and praying and taking that time to turn inward and to try to figure out next steps, I think your decision was the correct decision.
Thank you.
And I know you have a very important and bright future, but I know right now with voter suppression taking place, with the denial of so many resources to our communities, and working for fair census count, working for economic equity, and all of the work that you're doing, it has such a ripple effect for so many people. And I know that what you're doing in Georgia, not only is it for Georgians, but it's for the entire country. And so I have to take this moment to thank you and just say to you, my sister, you did make the right decision. And I'm going to tell my colleagues who are still balking about that to stop it right now. I know you have a call to action for us, so let's hear it.
Well, here's the call to action. We have to fight for the country we want. And we have to remember that what we do in America affects the world. And so what we have to do is fight for our elections. That means supporting you in the work you're doing to make sure that every vote gets cast and every vote gets counted. We have to make certain that there is a fair and accurate census. So folks who haven't gotten their census information, or if you don't know if they have it, ask them, because we're talking about 10 years determined by one event. And if you like the past 10 years, congratulations. If you didn't, if you think your community deserves more, then fill out the census. That's the only thing that works. That's where the money comes from. And lastly, of course, we have to stand with those who are on the front lines, those in healthcare, not just the doctors and the nurses, but those health sanitation workers who are cleaning up after every single day, the folks who have to go to the grocery stores to work and may not be able to fill their own baskets, the people that we see who are out working every day, who need us to know that their work is not just about bravery, it's about necessity. And so we have to be working to ensure that we elect leaders in November 2020 who see and understand the value of every person. And if we get that done, we are on the road and we will know better each time where we go from here. Thank you so much, Barbara Lee, for inviting me. Thank you for the series. And thank you so much for the leadership you provide every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the children and the young people at the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center. Bye-bye. And good.
Take care.
Okay. Let me thank everyone once again for being with us this evening. I just want to share with you that tonight, this is the 25th anniversary of our lecture series. So Stacey Abrams really provided this very wonderful, very important historical 25th lecture for us tonight. And I just wanted to say thank you again to Stacey, and to remind you that we have the General Secretary of the Smithsonian Museum with us on May 28th. Again, it'll be a virtual conversation. Let's see how that works, but please tune in to hear it and see Lonnie Bunch. So thank you again. Thank you for 25 years of really some very important discussions that have really sustained itself through our sponsors and through all of our supporters of the Martin Luther King Freedom Center, and of course, our young people. Thank you.